Well, hello all. You know, there's nothing worse than when you're having a cup of coffee and the cup of coffee starts off so beautiful and hot and you're enjoying it. And then over a matter of time, as you're doing stuff, it just gets colder and colder and you don't realize how miserable that cup of coffee becomes. So I said there's just nothing worse than a lukewarm cup of coffee. Cancer is worse than coffee that's warm. Okay, I suppose cancer is worse than a lukewarm cup of coffee. The war in Ukraine is worse. Okay, the war in Ukraine is worse than a lukewarm cup of coffee. COVID-19 is worse. Okay, COVID-19 is worse than a lukewarm cup of coffee. Okay, let's say a lukewarm cup of coffee is a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. But let's try and see if we can solve this problem of keeping a cup of coffee hot for the whole duration of the cup of coffee. So what I'm planning to do is to set up an experiment whereby we have 1 cup of coffee, which we just make it and we leave it to stand for about 40 minutes and see how its temperature declines. And then, you know what this thing is, right? So this is a coffee machine. And the coffee machine has got this little hot plate at the bottom. Now, I tried this coffee machine a couple of times, about 10, 15 years ago, and I never found that the coffee was quite hot enough after it had percolated through into the little jug. So I thought, standing here in my basement, why don't we try switching on this little plate and putting our cup of coffee on the plate and seeing if that keeps our cup of coffee hot over a period of, let's say, an hour. So there's one thing we embrace on this channel, and that is science. So we're going to perform an experiment to see whether a cup of coffee will stay hot on a coffee machine plate compared to how does a cup of coffee cool down without the plate. So I've set up the experiment as follows. We've got our experiment, which is the cup of coffee, which we're going to get 2 identical cups. Obviously, in science, we want to have our experiment and our control. And our experiment cup is going to be on the hot plate, and the control cup is just going to be on a piece on the table of wood. And then we're going to start at time 0. We're going to have at time 0 and then 5 minutes, etc. And at time 0, when we start, we're going to have the temperature. And then each 5-minute interval, we're going to record the drop in temperature of our 2 cups of coffee. So, right, so what we have here is some hot coffee straight out of the microwave. Let's measure its temperature. 78 or 79. We're going to pour equal amounts into our experiment cup and our control cup. So we've got to make sure that they're more or less the same amounts of coffee in both. Looks it. Let's just check this one's temperature. 76 or 75, 76, 75. Okay, so they're now identical. We're going to wait till the clock comes around to the 12 o'clock position, and then we're going to put our experiment onto the coffee maker's hot plate, and we're going to leave our control just on this wooden table. So, and then we're going to measure the temperatures at both. Okay, so let's start at time 0. Temperature of our experiment, 75.5. Control, 75. Okay, 0.2. Okay, so now this goes, they're both 75. So let's now write down experiment 75, control 75. They both came, the coffee came out of the same cup for both. And then when this gets around to the 5-minute mark, let's take another reading and let's do it 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. So we are coming up to our 5-minute mark. Let's get ready to take our reading again. First of our experiment and our control. Okay, the experiment. $67, $62, $63, $67, $63. Okay, so we are coming up for 10 minutes. Let's see what our experiment reads. 64. And our control, 58. 59. It's coming up for 15 minutes, so let's take the temperature of our experiment. 62. Our control, 51. 20 minutes have now passed. Let's check our experiment. 60. Our control, 48, 60 and 48. So now it's 25 minutes have passed. Let's check out our experiment. 58, or 57 actually. 44, 57, 44. Okay, so we can see that this is coming around for the 30 minutes that the coffees have stood. So let's try our experiment. 58. $41. Right, it's coming up for 35 minutes. Let's try our experiment. 58. 39. Right, so here then is our last reading at time 40 minutes. So let's try our experiment. 57. And our control, 37. 57 and 37. So then, here is our final data. I actually did the experiment twice. Once when I pointed the laser at the cup from a distance, and then the second time, which I think is more accurate, when I stuck the laser or digital thermometer right in the cup. So I'm going to go with this second set of readings. They look more accurate than when I just did it from a distance. So I wasn't satisfied because these readings jumped around a lot. So what have we got? Does a coffee machine keep a cup of coffee hot? That was our aim of the experiment. And then we had an experiment and a control. Here's our experiment on the hot plate. Our controls just sitting by itself. We did it every 5-minute interval. We got our data. We're not going to use this data because I considered it unreliable. So unreliable I wanted to get a reading that didn't jump around. These readings didn't jump around, so I'm quite happy with this data when I put it right into the cup, measuring the actual temperature of the liquid, not the outside of the cup. So we're going to graph this, and we're going to see. Now, if I taste very insipid and awful, that's our control. If I taste my experiment, which was on the hot plate, after 40 minutes, it's still delightfully hot. Not as hot as at first, but still delightfully hot. Look at a graph of our experiment versus time and our control temperatures versus time. You'll see that the graph of the experiment is a very gradual slope. In other words, it's cooling slowly, and our control has a much steeper slope downwards, so it means it's cooling much faster. So now we know how to keep that cup of coffee delightfully hot. I know I'm not the only one who hates lukewarm beverages. If you look at Revelation 1 verse 16, you'll see that Christ has a message to the churches. And if you look at Revelation 3 verse 16, you'll see that Christ speaks to the Laodicean church, and he says, because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. So he's using an analogy that lukewarm beverages are so disgusting that you just want to spit them out. We'd rather have hot coffee or maybe iced coffee, but we don't like lukewarm coffee, and neither does Christ. So now we know how to solve the problem. Get a coffee machine, maybe a second-hand one, put your cup on it. And I found that just leaving it stayed at 57 degrees. Didn't seem to get any cooler. And that is a that's a very nice temperature still to drink it at.